I'm in love with Julian, and I don't care what you think, Deborah declared on their anniversary, holding a glass of wine. Richard smiled and calmly replied, "Perfect, because I just sent your messages to the whole family." Her face went pale as her phone buzzed with incoming notifications. Richard pulled into the driveway of his in-laws' suburban Chicago home, the engine of his SUV humming softly before he cut it off. His wife, Deborah, sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving with a restless energy. Tonight was their 8th wedding anniversary, a milestone Richard felt proud to celebrate. He glanced at her, hoping for a spark of the warmth they used to share, but her eyes stayed glued to the screen. He shook off the unease, grabbed the bottle of wine he'd brought, and stepped out into the cool evening air. "Ready?" he asked, forcing a smile. Deborah nodded, slipping her phone into her purse. "Yeah, let's make this quick. Mom's probably overdone the catering again." Richard chuckled, but the comment stung. Quick. This was their night, a chance to reconnect with family and celebrate what they'd built. He'd even surprised her that morning with tickets to a Coldplay concert next month, her favorite band. She'd smiled, hugged him, but the embrace felt fleeting, like she was already somewhere else. They walked up the path to the house, the faint sound of laughter spilling from the open windows. Deborah's parents, Frank and Helen, greeted them at the door. Frank clapped Richard on the shoulder, his grip firm and warm, while Helen pulled Deborah into a hug, chattering about the menu. The dining room buzzed with relatives, uncles, aunts, and cousins, including Julian, Deborah's cousin, who'd recently moved back to Chicago after years in Miami. Julian leaned against the wall, sipping a beer, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Deborah. Richard caught the look, brief but deliberate, and felt a twinge in his gut. He brushed it off. Family gatherings were always a mix of chaos and comfort. "Richard, you're looking sharp tonight," Helen said, steering him toward the table. Sit. We got your favorite, lasagna." "Thanks, Helen," Richard replied, settling into a chair. He glanced at Deborah, who was already deep in conversation with her aunt across the table. Julian slid into a seat nearby, his posture relaxed, but his gaze flickering toward Deborah again. Richard tried to focus on the food, the clinking of glasses, the easy banter. He raised a toast, keeping it light. "To 8 years and counting," he said, his voice steady. The table cheered, but Deborah's smile was tight, her eyes darting to her phone under the table. The evening flowed smoothly, or so it seemed. Richard swapped stories with Frank about a recent architectural project, enjoying the older man's enthusiasm. But something fell off. Deborah was quieter than usual, her laughter forced. Julian, too, seemed to hover at the edge of conversations, his attention always circling back to her. Richard told himself it was nothing. Julian was family, an artist type, always a bit distant but harmless. Still, the air felt heavier than it should for a celebration. Halfway through dinner, Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. A work call from a client about a deadline. "Sorry, gotta take this," he said, excusing himself. He stepped out to the backyard, the cool grass underfoot grounding him as he answered. The client's voice droned on about blueprints, but Richard's attention wandered. Through the kitchen window, he saw movement. Deborah and Julian stood by the counter alone. The rest of the family was in the dining room, their voices a muffled hum. Richard watched, his breath catching, as Julian leaned in. Their lips met, a brief, deliberate kiss, charged with an intensity that hit Richard like a punch. It wasn't a mistake or a casual gesture. It was a moment that carried weight, a secret laid bare. His grip tightened on the phone, the client's voice fading to static. He forced himself to keep talking, to act normal, but his eyes stayed locked on the window. Deborah pulled back, her hand lingering on Julian's arm before she turned away, grabbing a dish like nothing had happened. Julian stayed still, watching her, a faint smile on his lips. Richard's heart pounded, his mind racing for an explanation. Maybe he'd misread it. Maybe it was a cousin thing, some family dynamic he didn't get. But the image was sharp, undeniable, cutting through every excuse he tried to summon. He ended the call, his voice clipped, and stood in the dark for a moment, staring at the ground. The laughter from inside felt like it belonged to another world. Everything he believed about his marriage, the trust, the shared dreams, cracked in that instant. 8 years. They'd met at a college reunion, reconnected over late-night talks and weekend road trips. They'd built a life in Chicago, a cozy house in Lincoln Park, a rhythm that felt solid. Sure, things had cooled lately. Deborah's long hours at her marketing job, her early bedtimes, the way she'd brush off his attempts to plan date nights. But betrayal? From her? From Julian? It was unthinkable. Richard took a deep breath and walked back inside, his face a mask of calm. Deborah was back at the table, laughing at something her aunt said, her ease almost infuriating. Julian leaned against the wall, swirling his drink, avoiding Richard's gaze. Richard sat down, nodding at Frank's question about work, but his mind was elsewhere. Every clink of cutlery, every toast, felt like a mockery of the night's purpose. He caught Deborah's eye once, searching for a hint of guilt, but she just smiled, oblivious to the storm building inside him. As the evening wound down, relatives started to leave, their goodbyes warm and lingering. Richard helped clear plates, keeping his movements deliberate. In the living room, he noticed Deborah's phone on the couch, screen up, unguarded, a rare slip for someone who always kept it close. His pulse quickened. He didn't want to be the guy who snooped, but the image of that kiss burned too brightly to ignore. He glanced around, saw Deborah helping her mom in the kitchen, and picked up the phone. Her passcode hadn't changed in years. He opened her messages, and there it was, Julian's name at the top. The conversation unfolded like a confession. Messages about meeting at a cafe downtown, a quick trip to an art gallery, phrases like "can't stop thinking about you." Then an audio clip. Richard hesitated, his thumb hovering, but he pressed play. Deborah's voice, soft and raw, filled his ears. "With you, I'm alive. With him, I'm just playing a part." The words landed like a blade, clean and deep. He scrolled further, each message a piece of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to solve. Dates lined up with nights she claimed to be swamped with work. It was all there, undeniable. Richard's hand shook as he saved screenshots to his phone, then transferred them to a flash drive he kept in his pocket for work. He set the phone back exactly as he'd found it, his movements mechanical. The dining room was emptying now, just Frank and Helen tidying up. Deborah walked in, laughing, her ease a stark contrast to the weight in Richard's chest. "Ready to go?" she asked, oblivious. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. As they walked to the car, her chatter about the night filled the silence, but Richard barely heard it. The kiss, the messages, her voice, they looped in his mind, each one a nail in the coffin of the life he thought they had. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it was the beginning of an end. Richard drove through the quiet Chicago streets, the city lights blurring past as Deborah hummed softly to the radio. Her casual chatter about her parents' dinner grated against the image burned into his mind. Her kiss with Julian, the damning messages, her voice confessing, "With you, I'm alive." He gripped the steering wheel, keeping his responses short, each word a struggle to maintain the facade of normalcy. The weight of her betrayal sat heavy in his chest, a truth he couldn't unsee. They pulled into their Lincoln Park driveway, the house dark except for a porch light casting long shadows. Deborah kicked off her shoes at the door, tossing her purse onto the couch. "I'm beat," she said, heading toward the bedroom. "Gonna shower and crash." Her voice was light, as if the night had been nothing but a pleasant family gathering. Richard stood frozen in the living room, the silence amplifying the chaos in his head. Her phone, left carelessly on the couch, seemed to pulse with the secrets he'd already uncovered. He sat down, staring at the device. The screenshots he'd saved to his flash drive were enough, but a part of him needed to know more, to understand how far this went. He picked up the phone again, scrolling deeper into her messages with Julian. The conversation stretched back months, casual at first, then intimate, laced with inside jokes and plans for meetups disguised as work or errands. One message from Julian read, "Can't wait for our next escape." Deborah's reply, "Soon. I'm tired of pretending." Each word tightened the knot in Richard's stomach, confirming the kiss wasn't a one-off. This was a calculated affair. He found another audio clip, dated a week ago. Deborah's voice, hushed but clear, "I don't know how much longer I can do this. You make me feel free." Richard's jaw clenched. He saved the file, his movements precise, as if documenting evidence could impose order on the betrayal. He returned the phone to its spot and leaned back, the sound of the shower running in the background a stark reminder of her obliviousness. The life they'd built, late-night talks, weekend hikes, shared dreams of a future, was unraveling, and she didn't even know he'd seen the truth. When the shower stopped, Richard braced himself. Deborah emerged, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair dripping onto the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone again, unaware of the storm about to break. Richard stood in the doorway, his voice low but steady. "I saw you in the kitchen. With Julian." The kiss. Deborah froze, her fingers pausing mid-scroll. She looked up, eyes wide but didn't speak. Richard continued, his tone measured. "I also heard your messages. With him, I'm playing a part. Sound familiar?" He held up the flash drive, letting the sight of it sink in. Her face drained of color, and she stood, clutching the towel tighter. "It's not what you think," she started, her voice shaky. "It was a mistake, a moment." "Don't." Richard cut her off. "I read the texts. I heard you say you're alive with him. Months of lies, Deborah. Months." He played the audio clip, her voice filling the room like an accusation. She closed her eyes, as if shutting out the sound could erase the reality. When it ended, she sank back onto the bed, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, barely above a whisper. "Julian and it just happened. But please, don't tell my family. It'll destroy Julian's reputation. They'll never forgive him." Richard laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Julian's reputation? That's your worry? Not us, not what you've done to me. You're unbelievable." He stepped closer, his voice cold. "You don't get to dictate what happens now. Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." Deborah's eyes widened, as if she'd expected a chance to talk it out. "Richard, we can work through this. I'll end it with him. I swear." "No," he said, final. "You made your choice. Figure out where you're staying." He turned away, unable to look at her any longer. She sat still for a moment, then moved to the closet, pulling out a suitcase. The sound of zippers and hangers clattered through the house, each one a step toward the end of their marriage. Richard stayed in the living room, staring out the window into the dark, the flash drive heavy in his pocket. Within 20 minutes, Deborah was ready. She grabbed her purse and keys, the suitcase trailing behind her. "I'll go to Julian's," she said quietly, almost defiantly. Richard didn't respond. She walked out, the door clicking shut behind her. He heard the car engine start, saw the red taillights disappear down the street. He knew exactly where she was headed, and the certainty of it fueled his resolve. The next morning, Richard sat at his desk, the flash drive plugged into his laptop. He opened the family group chat, the one filled with holiday photos and birthday wishes. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of him wanted to keep this private, to spare the mess, but Deborah's plea to protect Julian gnawed at him. She'd chosen her cousin over their marriage, and now the truth would choose its own path. He typed a single line, "You need to know what's been going on." Then he attached the audio clip and a handful of screenshots, enough to make the betrayal undeniable. He hit send, his phone buzzing instantly as reactions poured in. Aunts and cousins sent confused emojis, questions piling up. Then Frank called, his voice tight with disbelief. "Richard, what is this? You're saying Deborah and Julian? That's absurd. They're cousins." "I saw them." "Frank," Richard said, his tone even. "Check the messages. Ask Deborah where she's been the last 2 nights." He hung up before Frank could argue, the silence that followed heavy with the weight of what he'd just unleashed. By noon, the group chat was chaos. Deborah's mother, Helen, sent a private message, pleading for a call. Richard ignored it. Then Deborah's name flashed on a screen. He answered, bracing himself. "How could you?" she shouted. "You sent that to everyone? You've ruined my family." "You ruined it," Richard shot back. "You and Julian. I just made sure no one's buying your lies anymore." She tried to argue, her voice cracking, but he ended the call. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Richard leaned back in his chair, the adrenaline fading. He opened his laptop and searched for a divorce lawyer, scrolling through reviews until he found one with a reputation for efficiency. He dialed the number, laying out the facts, the affair, the evidence, his need for a clean break. The lawyer's calm voice outlined the process: petition, evidence submission, timelines. Richard took notes, his focus sharp. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his life. As the call ended, his phone buzzed again. A text from Frank. "Talk to Deborah. You were right. I am sorry." Richard read it, then set the phone down. Apologies couldn't undo what had happened, but they confirmed one thing. The life he'd known was over, and what came next was up to him. Richard sat at his desk in his Lincoln Park home, the morning light filtering through the blinds. His laptop screen displayed an email from his lawyer confirming the divorce petition had been filed. The screenshots and audio clips of Deborah's affair with Julian were attached, ready to streamline the process. His phone, silenced after yesterday's chaos, lay beside him, its screen dark but heavy with the fallout of the family group chat. The truth about Deborah and Julian had spread like wildfire, and Richard felt the weight of it settling into a strange calm. He wasn't angry anymore, just focused. The night before, after Deborah stormed out to Julian's, Richard had acted swiftly. Sending the evidence to the family chat wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, a way to strip away the lies she'd woven. The reactions had been immediate: shock from cousins, terse questions from aunts, and a heated call from Frank, Deborah's father, who'd initially called the accusations absurd. But after Richard's pointed suggestion to ask Deborah where she'd spent the night, Frank's tone had shifted. His apology text, brief and heavy, confirmed what Richard already knew. The betrayal was undeniable, and the family was fracturing under its weight. Now, as Richard sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed again. A voice message from Helen, Deborah's mother. Her voice trembled, caught between disbelief and pain. "Richard, we had no idea. I'm so sorry. Please, let's talk." He listened, then set the phone down without replying. Talking wouldn't change what he'd seen through the kitchen window or heard in Deborah's own words. "With you, I'm alive." The trust they'd built over 8 years was gone, and no amount of apologies could rebuild it. He turned back to his laptop, drafting a response to the lawyer. He wanted the divorce to move quickly, clean, no negotiations. The house, bought in his name before the marriage, was secure. Shared assets were minimal, and the evidence of Deborah's infidelity would simplify any disputes. As he typed, a knock at the door interrupted him. He frowned, expecting no one. Through the peephole, he saw Frank, standing stiffly, hands in his pockets. Richard opened the door, keeping his expression neutral. "Frank, mind if I come in?" Frank asked, his voice low. Richard stepped aside, and they sat in the living room, the silence heavy. Frank cleared his throat. "I talked to Deborah last night. She admitted everything. Her and Julian, it's been going on for months. I'm ashamed, Richard. We raised her better than this." Richard nodded, letting the words hang. He appreciated Frank's honesty, but it didn't erase the sting. "I saw them at your house, Frank, during our anniversary dinner. That's not something you just get past." Frank looked down, his hands clasped tightly. "I know. Helen's devastated. The whole family's a mess. Julian's been dodging calls, but I told him to stay away. Deborah's back at our place now. She left Julian's this morning." Richard's jaw tightened. So she'd run to Julian, only to return to her parents when the truth came out. "She made her choice," he said. "I'm done protecting her lies." Frank nodded, his face lined with regret. "I don't blame you. I had to see you, to say we're sorry. You've always been good to us." He stood, hesitating. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." Richard walked him to the door, offering a curt nod. As Frank's car pulled away, Richard felt a flicker of relief. The confrontation hadn't been hostile, but it solidified his resolve. This wasn't just about Deborah. It was about reclaiming his life from the wreckage she'd left behind. Back at his desk, he opened the family group chat. Messages had piled up overnight. Cousins demanding explanations, an uncle calling for a family meeting, and a few scattered apologies for not seeing the signs. Julian had left the chat entirely, his absence conspicuous. Then a new message from Deborah popped up, sent to him privately. "You didn't have to destroy my family. We could have handled this quietly." Richard stared at the words, her audacity reigniting the anger he'd been holding at bay. She was still deflecting, still protecting Julian. He typed back, his fingers steady. "You destroyed it when you chose him. Don't contact me again." He blocked her number, the action final, like closing a door. The lawyer had advised keeping communication minimal, and Richard intended to follow through. By afternoon, he met with his lawyer, Sarah, at her downtown office. She reviewed the evidence, her expression professional but empathetic. "This is airtight," she said, scrolling through the screenshots. "Adultery's clear, and with the house in your name, we're looking at a straightforward division of assets. You want to push for mediation or go straight to court?" "Court," Richard said without hesitation. "I want this done." Sarah nodded, jotting notes. "We'll file for fault-based divorce. The evidence supports it, and it'll expedite things. Deborah's lawyer might try to drag it out, but they won't have much to stand on." She outlined the next steps: serving papers, discovery, potential hearings. Richard listened, his focus unwavering. This was a plan, a path forward, not just an end. As he left the office, his phone buzzed again, a call from his friend Mark, who'd been out of town during the dinner. "Man, I just saw the group chat. What the hell happened?" Richard gave him a brief rundown. The kiss, the messages, the confrontation. Mark cursed under his breath. "You need backup? I'm back tonight. We can grab a beer, talk it out." Richard agreed, grateful for the offer. That evening, over drinks at a quiet bar in Wicker Park, he laid out the whole story. Mark listened, shaking his head. "She threw away 8 years for her cousin? That's next level messed up. What's your next move?" "Divorce," Richard said, sipping his beer, "and moving on. I'm not wasting energy on her anymore." Mark raised his glass. "To new beginnings, then." Richard clinked his glass, the gesture small but grounding. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope. Not for fixing what was broken, but for building something new. Meanwhile, across town, Deborah sat in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, the air thick with tension. Helen had barely spoken to her all day, her disappointment palpable. Frank, usually the peacemaker, was firm. "You need to figure out how to make this right." The family's group chat, once a place for light-hearted updates, was now a battleground of accusations and silence. Julian, under pressure, had announced he was leaving Chicago for new projects in Seattle. His departure was swift, a coward's exit, leaving Deborah to face the fallout alone. That night, Richard lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house felt too quiet without Deborah's presence, but the silence wasn't empty. It was space. Space to rebuild, to rediscover who he was outside the shadow of her betrayal. He thought of the lawyer's words, the evidence, the clean break ahead. The anniversary dinner was supposed to mark 8 years of love. Instead, it marked the end of a lie and the start of something he could control. Richard leaned back in a chair at the Lincoln Park coffee shop, his laptop open to a draft of a new architectural proposal. The divorce papers had been served to Deborah a week ago, and the process was moving steadily, fueled by the undeniable evidence of her affair with Julian. His lawyer, Sarah, had assured him the case was strong, with little room for delays. Richard's focus was sharp, his days filled with work and deliberate steps toward a new chapter. The chaos of the family group chat had quieted, but the fallout of his revelations still rippled through Deborah's family. His phone buzzed, a text from his friend Mark. "Lunch today? Need to catch up." Richard agreed, grateful for the distraction. At the diner, Mark slid into the booth, his usual grin replaced with concern. "Heard from my cousin, who's friend with Helen. Deborah's a mess at her parents' place. Julian's gone radio silent, left for Seattle or something. You holding up?" Richard nodded, stirring his coffee. "I'm good. The lawyer's handling everything. Just want it over." He recounted the latest, Deborah's attempt to call him after he'd sent the screenshots, her plea to keep things quiet, and Frank's reluctant apology after confronting her. Mark shook his head. She thought she could hide it forever? Bold move, blowing up an 8-year marriage for her cousin. Ex-cousin now, Richard said, his tone dry. He's out of the picture, but the damage is done. He didn't linger on the details. Talking about it felt like picking at a wound, and he was done bleeding. Instead, he shifted to work, mentioning a new project designing a community center. Mark listened, offering a few quips to lighten the mood, and by the time they parted, Richard felt steadier. Back home, he checked his email. Sarah had sent an update. Deborah's lawyer was pushing for mediation, likely to avoid a public court battle. Richard replied immediately, rejecting the idea. "No mediation. Move to court," he wrote. The evidence, screenshots, audio clips, timestamps, was airtight. He wasn't interested in negotiating with someone who'd lied to his face for months. The house, in his name from before the marriage, was secure. Shared assets were minimal, mostly furniture and a joint savings account they'd barely touched. The divorce would be clean, if not painless. Later that day, his phone rang. It was Helen, Deborah's mother, her voice hesitant. "Richard, I know you don't owe us anything, but can we talk? Just me and Frank." He considered hanging up, but agreed to meet them at a neutral spot, a park near their suburban home. When he arrived, Frank and Helen sat on a bench, their faces drawn. Frank spoke first, his voice heavy. "We didn't see this coming. Deborah told us everything. How it started, how long it went on. We're not excusing it, but she's struggling. She's sorry, Richard." Richard kept his expression neutral. "Sorry doesn't undo what I saw, Frank, or what I heard in her messages. She chose Julian over our marriage. That's not a mistake, it's a decision. Helen's eyes welled up. We know. We've told her she needs to take responsibility. But the family's falling apart. Cousins aren't speaking, and Julian, he's gone. Left yesterday. Said he's starting over in Seattle. Richard nodded, unsurprised. Julian's exit was predictable. A quick escape from the consequences of his actions. He's good at running, Richard said. But Deborah's the one who broke our vows. I'm not here to fix your family. I'm moving on. His words were firm, not cruel, but they landed heavily. Frank and Helen exchanged a glance, then nodded, accepting the boundary. As Richard walked away, he felt no satisfaction, only clarity. Their regret couldn't rewrite the past. That evening, Richard opened the family group chat, now a shadow of its former warmth. Messages were sparse, mostly logistical updates about gatherings no one seemed eager to attend. He noticed Deborah had left the chat, her absence as telling as Julian's. A private message from a cousin popped up. You did the right thing. Nobody knew she'd go that far. Richard didn't reply. The validation was unnecessary. The truth spoke for itself. The next day, he met Sarah at her office to review the divorce timeline. She laid out the court date, set for 3 weeks out. Deborah's lawyer is scrambling, Sarah said, tapping her pen. They're offering a settlement, split the savings, no alimony. You keep the house. It's a good deal, but we can push for more if you want. No, Richard said. Take it. I just want her out of my life. Sarah nodded, making a note. As he left, his phone buzzed with another message, this time from an unknown number. It was Deborah, using a friend's phone. I know you hate me, but I need to talk. Please. Richard deleted it, his decision final. She had her chance to talk. Every night she'd lied. Every time she'd met Julian in secret. That door was closed. Over the next week, Richard threw himself into routine. He started running again, his mornings filled with the steady rhythm of sneakers on pavement in Lincoln Park. Work became a refuge, each blueprint a step away from the mess of the past. He reconnected with old friends, including a colleague, Emily, who joined him for a coffee run one afternoon. Her easy laugh and sharp wit were a welcome change, free of the baggage he'd carried with Deborah. They talked about work, music, anything but his divorce, and for the first time in weeks, Richard felt a spark of something new. Meanwhile, Deborah remained at her parents' house, the air thick with unspoken tension. Frank and Helen were supportive but firm, pushing her to face the consequences. The family's judgment was relentless. Cousins avoided her. Aunts whispered during calls. Julian's departure left her isolated, his promises of starting over together, evaporating the moment the family turned on him. She spent nights scrolling through old photos of her and Richard, each one a reminder of what she'd thrown away. Her attempts to reach out to Richard were met with silence, her messages deleted unread. One evening, Richard's phone buzzed with a voice note from Frank. Deborah's lawyer agreed to the settlement. She's not fighting it. I just want you to know we're not taking sides, but we respect what you're doing. Richard listened, then archived the message. Respect was fine, but it didn't change the path he was on. The divorce was moving forward, the court date looming. He wasn't looking for closure with Deborah's family, just freedom from the life she'd broken. As he prepared for bed, Richard glanced at his phone. A text from Emily. Up for a run tomorrow? Lakefront Trail? He smiled, typing back a quick sure. It wasn't a date, not yet, but it was a step. The anniversary dinner, the kiss, the messages, they were fading into the background, replaced by the promise of something untainted. Deborah's choices had ended one chapter, but Richard was already writing the next. Richard jogged along the lakefront trail, the Chicago skyline sharp against the morning sky. Emily kept pace beside him, her steady strides matching his. Their runs had become a routine over the past month, a quiet rhythm that felt easy, unforced. They didn't talk about his divorce, now finalized after a swift court hearing, but her presence was a reminder of what life could be. Simple, honest, free of betrayal. As they slowed to a walk, Emily nudged him, grinning. You're getting faster. Trying to show me up? Richard laughed, catching his breath. Just keeping up with you. The moment was light, a contrast to the weight he'd carried since that anniversary dinner when he saw Deborah kiss Julian. The divorce was done. Paper signed, assets split, the house is alone. The evidence of Deborah's affair had ensured a clean break. No alimony, no disputes. He'd packed away their shared photos, locked them in storage, and moved forward. His phone buzzed as they grabbed water. A text from Mark. Congrats on the divorce being final. Beer tonight? Richard typed it quick, feeling a sense of closure. The past year had been a storm. Deborah's infidelity, the family group chat exploding with screenshots, Julian's cowardly exit to Seattle. But now, standing by the lake with Emily, the chaos felt distant, like a chapter closed. Across town, Deborah sat on a bench in a quiet park, clutching a coffee cup, waiting for a friend who was running late. Her life had unraveled since Richard exposed her affair. She'd moved back to her parents' house after Julian left, her family's disapproval a constant weight. Frank and Helen were supportive but firm, their conversations laced with lessons about accountability. Cousins avoided her, their silence louder than words. Julian, once her escape, had cut contact, his new projects a flimsy excuse for running. She scrolled through her phone, landing on an old photo of her and Richard laughing at a concert. The memory stung, a reminder of what she'd thrown away for a fleeting thrill. Her friend canceled last minute, leaving Deborah alone. She looked up, scanning the park, and froze. Across the path, Richard walked with Emily, their hands brushing as they talked. He laughed at something she said, his ease unmistakable. Deborah's chest tightened, a mix of guilt and regret surging through her. She wanted to call out, to say something, anything, to bridge the gap she'd created. But the words wouldn't come. She stayed rooted to the bench, watching them disappear around a bend, the question echoing in her mind. How did I let this happen? Richard didn't see her. He and Emily stopped by a food truck, grabbing tacos and settling on a nearby bench. Their conversation flowed. Work, music, plans for a weekend hike. Emily's humor was sharp, her questions thoughtful, pulling Richard into the present. He felt no need to perform, no weight of hidden truths. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was real, and that was enough. Back at her parents' house, Deborah faced another tense dinner. Frank brought up the divorce, his tone measured. Richard's moving on. You need to do the same. Helen nodded, her silence heavy with disappointment. Deborah pushed her food around, the family's judgment a mirror she couldn't escape. She tried reaching out to Richard once more, using a friend's phone, but his silence was absolute. The affair, once a secret spark, had cost her everything. Her marriage, her family's trust, her sense of self. The next day, Richard met his lawyer, Sarah, to tie up loose ends. She handed him the final decree, the signatures stark on the page. You're officially free, she said, her smile professional but warm. Any plans? Richard shrugged, mentioning the hike with Emily. Sarah nodded. Sounds like a good start. That evening, at the bar with Mark, Richard raised a glass. To what's next, he said. Mark clinked his beer, grinning. To not looking back. They talked late, the conversation shifting from the divorce to new projects, new possibilities. Richard felt the space in his life expanding, room for something better. Deborah, meanwhile, started therapy, pushed by Helen to confront her choices. The sessions were raw, forcing her to unravel why she'd risked so much for Julian. She wrote a letter to Richard, an apology she never sent, knowing it wouldn't change anything. Her family's gatherings grew smaller, the absence of Julian and the strain with cousins a constant reminder of the fallout. She took a new job, one that kept her busy, but the loneliness lingered, a consequence she couldn't outrun. A week later, Richard and Emily hiked a trail outside Chicago, the autumn air crisp. They stopped at a lookout, the city a distant shimmer. Emily handed him a water bottle, their fingers brushing. You're quiet today, she said, her tone light but curious. Just thinking, Richard replied, about how fast things can change. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. They walked on, the trail stretching ahead, each step a move away from the past. He thought of Deborah briefly, not with anger, but with detachment. Her choices had broken their marriage, but they'd also freed him to find this. Moments of ease, of possibility. In the park, Deborah sat alone again, her coffee cold. She saw a couple pass, their laughter echoing, and the question returned, sharper now. How did I let this happen? There was no answer, only the weight of her actions and the life she'd lost. She stood, tossing the cup, and walked home, each step a reminder that some mistakes don't get second chances. Richard's phone buzzed as he and Emily reached the trailhead. A message from Frank. Heard the divorce is final. Wishing you well. Richard archived it, no reply needed. The past was settled, the future open. He turned to Emily, her smile pulling him back to the moment. Ready for dinner? She asked. Yeah, he said, his voice steady. Let's go. As they drove back to the city, the skyline glowing, Richard felt the weight of the last year lift. Deborah's betrayal had ended one story, but it had also started another, one he was ready to write.